And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Sibsand people. Biofeedback was coined in 1969 to describe laboratory procedures first developed in the 1940s that trained research subjects to alter blood pressure, muscle tension, and heart rate. As the field of psychophysiology evolved, biofeedback instruments were built to feedback signals generated by sweat gland activity, skin temperature, electrical brain activity, and finally, brain blood flow. All nervous system functions not normally considered voluntary. On today's Open Connection, Dr. Patricia Vickers shares how biofeedback helped her on her healing journey.
I first learned about it in 2017. Having dissociative amnesia. Two colleagues of mine were trained in LENS, which is a low energy neurofeedback system. And it is different to the system I've purchased and am trained on. LENS emits a weak signal, weaker than your cell phone, into the brain that mirrors the brain's activity. And by doing that, the mind can then access memory. How amazing is that? I mean, it was, of course, if you have dissociative amnesia, it's going to be horrifying memory. But what I couldn't recall, I then couldn't heal from. So, and I had that understanding as a psychotherapist. And so I did 2 years of neurofeedback, but 3-4 months of LENS. And I would say it was much better than EMDR for me, which is working just with the eyes and eye movement, or the ears. They work with either. And so I was able to recall the most important things to recall through neurofeedback. So, but a particular system. Then there are other systems that work with training the brain. So neurofeedback is biofeedback for the brain. So then it's like because the brain is an organ, you're going to the gym to work out your brain. Basically, that's what it's about. So what I do now is the system is called Eager. And I went down I first did a neurofeedback training through the Australian Neurofeedback Institute. And the brain's, there's so much to know. It's amazing. And then I went to Massachusetts to do a practicum to use the system that I purchased. And so now I've been working with friends and family, and I haven't actually opened a clinic yet, but I'm seeing really good results with family and friends. You'd be seated in the chair, and I would first do a mini map of your brain. And so how I do that is you'd have a sensor here, and you'd have a sensor here, and then one on your what's called PZ, which is the brain stem and all there is about fight, flight. So all of that activity back here. And your eyes are going to be open for 1 minute and closed for 1 minute, because that way we'll see if you relax when your eyes are closed or if there's more brainwave activity. So with trauma, we're going to see more brainwave activity when the eyes are closed. So once I've completed the mini map, then I get your posterior dominant rhythm. So, and I'm working primarily with rewarding your alpha wave. That's your meditation, your relaxed state, because I'm not able to, I think of all the times I raged when my kids were small because I couldn't access that state. But we do if we go to a favorite place in nature. Like you've got a lot of nature shots that you post. So that's about helping to regulate the brain. So you go and you feel safe and it just gets you into that alpha state. When you get on your bike and you let go of everything, I would assume. Yeah. So this is doing that. Your brain is being trained to do that. So you don't have to get on your bike. Eventually, you're just aware of when you're activated, when you're triggered, and everything, even though it's moving at the same pace, it's actually slowing down, if that makes sense.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. Alpha brain waves are associated with the state of calm, creativity, and improved ability to learn new information. They can be produced when the brain is in an idle state, such as with someone meditating, resting, or daydreaming. Let us turn to the conversation with Dr. Vickers. It's kind of like when they say sometimes things move in slow motion kind of thing? Or?
Yeah, not like shock, slow motion, more like awareness. So when you meditate and you close your eyes and you're still, then you're aware of sounds, of movement, of energy. Your awareness increases because you're coming into a calmer place. So not being able to be in alpha means that, and for all of us who've lived with intergenerational trauma, then it's difficult to be there. And that's why drugs, that's why alcoholism, because being calm and still means I might remember what I don't want to remember. So, whatever it is that's distracted me from being calm and still and remembering, that becomes more like an obsessive or habitual, as Buddhists say, habitual behavior. So the neurofeedback slows all of that down, and I can notice, oh, I'm feeling anxious. What am I anxious about? Oh, I'm anxious about where do I live? Where do I settle down? Where is that to be? And then staying in alpha, I can look at my own fear and say, it'll open up. I don't have to worry. Just like it has for all of us on our healing journey, something opens up and we get the help we need because we want it. We want to change. And let's say instead of logical, because when you're riding your bike, are you thinking logically?
No, because I wouldn't be on the bike.
Right, but you're in tune with something. There's something going on that's beyond logic. You're aware of the roads and the conditions of the roads. You're taking in all the peripheral when you get on your bike. How I would describe it is when we're having a spiritual experience. Then there is no time, and we have this awareness that's peripheral, and even like eyes in the back of our head. Not so I can dominate or be in control, but just so that I can be fully present and aware for whatever the shift is going to be. We know it's going to be a good one. The first few visits are really mostly for you, so you can begin to see your waves and what your brain is doing. And And then we begin the training. So you see on a monitor, there's a blue line, which is your alpha wave. And then there's a pink line, which is your slow wave. It's your theta wave. And then there's a yellow, not line, pink square, yellow square, blue line that goes to both. So, and that's your fast wave, the yellow, which is your beta wave. And so once you learn that, then your brain gets rewarded every time the alpha is within that. The alpha moves between 8 and 12 hertz per second. That's the alpha. So whenever you're in that range, you get scores. Just you've got a hockey jersey on. You get scores. And once you have 500, which you would most likely get.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. A 2014 study found that neurofeedback training helps some people with generalized anxiety disorder. Neurofeedback is a type of biofeedback where you respond in real time to electroactivity in your brain and try to adjust it. Let us return to the conversation as Dr. Vickers shares how you can increase your alpha waves.
There are 4 periods. So once you, maybe third period, you hit 500 because your brain is caught on. Your mind's still trying to figure everything out. Your brain, I got this. That's the brain. And when you hit 500 in your brain training with this one program, then the volcano erupts. You see this mountain and these seagulls happening and points, and your brain understands what it has to do to be rewarded. Because we're having a look at where your brain is with the mini map. And then your first training is, and it's only 12 minutes, by the way, like 3 minutes per period. That's all it takes to train the brain. And then about 25 to 30 sessions for it to be a lasting change. Your mind eventually catches up, maybe by about the 5th or 6th session, you begin to get and understand that your brain knows what it's doing. And your mind can relax and let the brain do what it knows how to do. So what it's done for most of us is it's helped us to survive by being hyper or hypo. And so what the brain training does is it brings us into what's called like the window of tolerance. And that window widens as the mind learns to trust the brain to relax. I first went through the 4 months of lens, and then I went through other training, and then I purchased this system, and I've already put myself through 25 sessions, treated myself. And I like what's happening with the system that I have now, how much more relaxed I am. And it takes about a half hour. Yeah, because, I have to put the stabilizing on your ear, and then one sensor on the right hemisphere, one sensor on the left hemisphere. Most of us are going to start this way with intergenerational trauma. And what it does is it just helps the hemispheres to talk to each other, and just generally for the brain to relax. So, we need it in our all of our nations, because we have an enormous task. I mentioned earlier, my father was diagnosed as a pedophile, And it's been a long journey of healing. And if I had neurofeedback 25 years ago, it really would have shortened my journey for sure. So because we need to be telling the truth in our nations and in our communities, in our families, we need to be telling the truth about, those who've offended. They need to be able to tell the truth and get help. Because we see it in some of our communities where those who've been sexually abused, they'll talk about it, but not the offenders. So I think we really need to be that kind of safe community where my father wouldn't be considered an animal or a monster, but somebody whose brain really became distorted over time. And I think, that's the problem, that our biggest problem right now in our communities. And it's really difficult to, to see that door open.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
1.25 million young people need help in Canada. On January 22nd, let's support youth mental health. Visit bell.ca/let's talk.
A healing journey is a process of transformation that involves moving from emotional distress to a state of greater emotional well-being. It can be a gradual process that involves developing bridges from suffering to healing resources, skills, and connections. In this final segment of Open Connection, Dr. Vickers shares how to achieve true truth and reconciliation.
Yeah, the truth-telling. We think of truth and reconciliation. Really, the work we need to be doing is in our own families, the truth and reconciliation. That's where it really needs to happen. Then we're truly self-determined. Yeah? Then we're not focusing on money. We're focusing on what I understood the elders from so many communities were speaking to, and that's that goodness within our center, in our being, and the ability really to love and forgive. Dissociative amnesia, I went for therapy with a family member, and this family member told me about all these rapes that had happened, and I had no memory. And so I went to my physician and I said, how could that happen? And he said, it's called dissociative amnesia. I said, what can I do? And he didn't know about neurofeedback in 2006. And he said, I'll send you to a psychiatrist. So I went. I was doing research for my doctorate in Vancouver, and I went to a psychiatrist. It was a terrible experience. It was horrifying, and I just didn't want to remember anymore. So it wasn't until 2017, so that was 2006. So 11 years later, I said, I've got to do this. And so a couple of colleagues that I'd worked with in Port Hardy, they said, this is what you need. So I've done what's called Alpha Down, a research project in 2 different communities. And things happen when you're training the brain. You can talk about what you remember or not. So that's the beauty of neurofeedback, is I think there's more privacy to it. And so this particular protocol that I was using, called Alpha Down, so it was inhibiting alpha, not rewarding it, which means that for a half hour, their brain was being inhibited to go into alpha. It wasn't being allowed, it wasn't being rewarded if it did. So when they would leave the session, then it was like inhibiting, and then they'd leave the session, and then the brain would go into alpha. And so when people were about 10, 12 sessions, this one particular person who has given me permission without their name, they came in and they said, I had a dream. My dream was I was in my parents' house. Our curtains were drawn, but they were sheer and everybody could see in. And there was one room in my house where I was terrified to go to, and I knew it was all black in that room, and I would not open the door. And I said, so do you think maybe your brain wants to release some memory to your mind? And this person said, yes, I think that's where I am. And then either the next session or the next week, they came in and they told me of a memory of when their younger sibling was a toddler and wouldn't stop crying. Both parents, Indian residential school survivors, both parents alcoholics. And her little brother was crying, father drunk, picks up toddler brother and just throws him against the wall in the house, and baby crumbles. And that damaged permanently the brain of this person's younger sibling. And I'm sitting there as this person's telling me this, and just this, you can feel the violence and the evil, I want to say. And then she said, I understand why my father did that. And then said he went to Indian residential school. He suffered that kind of abuse. And all the time she's saying this, not heaving, crying, but all tears are just streaming down her face. And then she says, after she says that, I'm looking at her thinking how amazing she is. Just all of this is coming out, and they're all facts, and she's calm. And then she says, and I forgive him. And that's when my tears started to come, and I just said, you're amazing. And I looked and I thought, not only our people, but just people in general really need this support, and it shouldn't cost an arm and a leg to get it, But that's the power of neurofeedback. You're right. She didn't have to tell me, but she came in and she felt safe, and then all of this, and it kept unfolding for her, and she just had this not dissociative disorder where you're outside of the body and you seem calm. No, she's fully in her body and calm, talking about horrifying things from her childhood.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.